To start the recording.
All right, well, we are recording.
Excellent, thank you. Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce my twice colleague, Ace Howard. Ace Howard is a human based in San Francisco, California. He currently works as a technical writer at Crunchyroll, where he also serves as a leader in Anime Enabled, an employee resource group focused on improving equity and inclusion efforts for people with disabilities. Ace enjoys frogs, the color red in moderation, and art in most forms. And he will be presenting to us today his talk entitled Improve Accessibility Today. So welcome, Ace. Wonderful to have you here. Before I turn it over, just a few housekeeping things. Ace told me that he is happy to field questions as we go. So if you are curious or have anything you'd like to chat about, please don't be shy. We'll also leave room at the end for some Q&A as well. So without anything else, thanks, Ace. It's all yours.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here to talk about what my work in accessibility that I'm currently in the process of doing at Crunchyroll. So let me start by setting up my screen to share. This is the first test. Let's see if I can pass. So let's go to this screen. I'm gonna go to presenter mode.
Yep,
So does everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. And I just need my notes window and I'll be good to go. Okay, so like Jasmine said, the title is Improve Accessibility Today. Although I'm realizing it's about 7:30. So, I mean, if you want to, we can improve accessibility starting tomorrow after this talk. But at the very least, we can start talking about it today. So some topics I'll go through, a little bit about me. Jasmine covered most of it. An introduction to accessibility, and then the actual steps that I've taken currently at Crunchyroll to improve accessibility with alt text, color contrast, and image annotations. And then I have an additional information slide that includes supporting links for each of these items. So yeah, so my name is Ace, and I put that's my real name because it is my real name. It was easy to spell as a child. I'm named after my great uncle Asa, whose nickname was Ace, in case anybody was wondering. And then just a little bit more about me. So I'm a writer, but I've also got experience in web development, marketing, and graphic design. So I've kind of seen all sorts of opportunities for improving accessibility for people, because I mean, what draws me to advocate for accessibility and documentation is because if we're not serving as many people as we can, then we're just not doing our jobs as technical communicators. And like Jasmine mentioned, I'm working at Crunchyroll. I'm sure everybody here is a big anime fan. So, but just in case you're not, it's the largest platform for anime streaming, which is, Japanese cartoons. It's interesting that this company really just serves that single type of content. But as somebody who's grown up watching things like Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z, it is surreal to be in a space that I've always been excited about since I was a child. And like Jasmine mentioned, I'm also part of the Anime Enabled Employee Resource Group, where I'm currently planning out some programs for the company to raise awareness on things like, how do people disclose a disability to get accommodations? How can management guide their employees to resources that they need so that they don't have to ask for it first. We want to create an environment where people feel included and that they belong. Frogs have always been my favorite animal growing up. There's at least one frog in this presentation, so yeah, it's the very next slide. Yeah, red's my favorite color. That's a very important distinction. And yes, art, whether it is, I love going to the Modern Art Museum, and I also love professional wrestling. So pretty much anything I'm into. So let's go on to introducing the actual topic. So to me, and honestly to everybody, I hope, accessibility around communication is not nice to have, but is a requirement. So what I'm dealing with right now in my company is that we're not mature enough to be compliant with accessibility standards set by the ADA in Section 508. And part of that process includes submitting a proposal so that the company can buy in and actually set standards for not just the documentation team, but for the web designers, for the marketers, to make sure that we are hitting all the marks that we need to hit from a legal standpoint, and also so we can actually serve our customers as effectively as possible. So that takes time. And you can see here I wrote out the steps to scaling in our accessibility. So there's 4 steps. So identifying the problem, which I've done that since pretty much my first day at Crunchyroll. And I'm also working on making fixes to these problems. And this is the low-hanging fruit that I was referring to in my abstract. The next steps, and I haven't gotten there yet with my current company, is actually sustaining these types of changes. So what that means is that we want to be able to audit our content and documentation so that we can make sure that we are continuing to be compliant and that it's not just a one and done deal. And then finally, where we eventually want to be is that we want to get to the championing stage so that the organization actually sees the value in these accessibility recommendations. And so this actually spreads out to not just documentation, it spreads out to even the video player for Crunchyroll, because I know right now there are lawsuits that say that we're required to provide closed captioning for our English language videos, and we're not currently doing that, which is a big miss, and I hope that the company can get to that point eventually. So right now, this presentation is based around where I'm currently at, identifying the problem and how we can fix it. So the first thing is alternative text. And I know I have a captive audience, so a lot of these animations are free associations from my brain. So why this is here is alt text makes me think of alt rock, and this is Vampire Weekend, which is one of my favorite alt rock bands. So what is alt text? So it is descriptive text which conveys the meaning and concept of a visual item in a digital setting, such as on an app or web page. So alt text provides information to folks who may or may not be able to load an image due to either technical issue or if they use a screen reader. And so a screen reader is a form of assisted technology that renders text and image content as speech or braille output. They're essential to people with visual disabilities and are useful to people for a variety of reasons, like maybe they're dyslexic and hearing the text on screen read aloud actually helps them process this information. Screen readers can only read input that is correctly tagged and structured with alt text. So what I've done at the company is I've identified that we do not have a requirement to actually add alternative text to the images in our documentation platform. Crunchyroll's main platform for docs is Confluence. So that's a pretty common tool for companies to collaborate, share information, much like Wikipedia. So what I've done is to help serve this, I've updated our internal company style guide so that I can provide guidance for people to actually add alternative text in their documentation. And this is just a screenshot of the actual page in our style guide. So you can see here, A good example for alt text for this specific image is polar bear on snow-covered ground in the daytime. The polar bear has its right arm raised. And again, like if this image doesn't load, this would display the alternative text. This is something that if you're using a screen reader, instead of just skipping over whatever this image is, it'll actually read this description. And yeah, if you have any questions about alternative text, again, like feel free to stop me anytime. But with that, I can go to the next item. Okay, so color contrast. And the reason why we have Po from Kung Fu Panda is, when I think black and white, I think of pandas, and Po is my favorite panda, possibly of all time. So like I said, color contrast refers to the difference between text and its background. So especially at Crunchyroll, as we create websites, documents, and presentations, sorry, hit the button. We must consider the low contrast of our text, graphics, and UI elements. Low contrast can make it difficult for readers to easily view the content. This is especially true for people with visual impairments, such as color blindness or low vision. Low contrast could also negatively affect the user experience for people without visual impairments. So for example, if the background and text are too similar in color, it can be difficult for people to read in bright sunlight on a small screen or on a device with different colors, different levels of color accuracy. And what I mean by that is, the colors that I see on my screen are not necessarily going to be the same colors you might see on your screen. So what I've done here, this is a screenshot of an article I wrote for a newsletter that my team publishes once a month. That's another form of, how we can evangelize our accessibility efforts. In this specific example, I'm actually showing the primary brand color for Crunchyroll, which is this lovely orange color. And from the marketing brand style guide, every header in the document on the white background is in this orange. Oh. It's not great. It's fine for a logo, but it's not something that we necessarily want to use throughout our documentation. And I wanted to call that out specifically in this newsletter. And I can talk about what this actual contrast ratio means once. This is something that if I put in a color into a tool, and I'll show this at the end. Actually, I'll show that right now. So let me I'll skip forward a little bit. Actually, we'll go to the end because I lost my controls. So this other font color is a secondary brand color for Crunchyroll. It's actually a dark blue. It has a high color contrast. When I run it through a contrast color checker, it passes the web standard for WCAG. And again, I'll talk about this at the end once I actually get to my more information slide. And then the third thing that I've had time to actually improve. So image annotations. This one was tricky. So, image annotations, these are pretty common method to emphasize elements on an image, whether that's a screenshot or maybe, if it's a photograph where you want to point out a specific spot on whatever the subject is. And just in general, for accessibility purposes, I tend to use less imagery we don't want to force people to have to rely on things like alternative text if we don't have to. We also want to make sure that each screenshot serves a purpose that is valuable and not just a substitute for text. So for example, in this screenshot, I'm actually saying what it displays instead of just putting a screenshot that's pointing to this button that says create space. So the reason why I found this to be problematic is there are no standard guidelines for image annotations set forth by the Microsoft style guide, the Google style guide. In fact, there's contradicting information from each guide. There's not consistent ways to actually mark up an image. So this gave me an opportunity to actually kind of do my own research into how we can actually address annotating an image in a way that serves the most people we can. So here I used both elements, or I used elements that I've talked about earlier. So first of all, I made sure that the images have alt text. And I also made sure that although this is a red, I ran it through a color contrast checker to make sure that it is still, very visible to people with color blindness. So even if they don't perceive the red and I apologize if anybody is colorblind on the call and I'm speaking for you. But with this specific color selection, it's got a dark enough contrast that it's still perceivable. And I also used the Snagit tool for images. And so I have the option to add a drop shadow to my annotations just to illustrate that this is an additional element to a screenshot, whether or not this shows up as red or not. But again, this was something that I had to kind of come up on my own because the guidance around annotated images just is not consistent or standardized. And like before, this was something that I had updated our company style guide with in order to help spread this message so that people can actually follow this guidance and improve accessibility as we are going forward. So here are some links, and I'll share the slide deck at the end. This is the tool I was talking about earlier. It's pretty straightforward to use. You could pick your foreground color, which is your text, your background color, which is usually going to be like a white or maybe even black. But so you don't have to like memorize the actual contrast ratios. If I look at orange, we can see it has a low contrast ratio for various text sizes and UI elements. This is very handy. I recommend bookmarking it because I personally struggle with contrast, with low contrast text. Something that I use on my computer is, especially when I'm working at night, I have a color temperature adjuster on my computer that switches from blue light to yellow light. So when I'm working later, I don't see the orange text. And I can see right now that my screen is changing colors as I'm talking. But I've also provided resources that I've used to generate some of the recommendations that I've mentioned earlier. But next steps at the company for me are to actually put together a proposal so that I can get buy-in from up top, because it's not actually sustainable to have new content that's accessible when we have a whole back catalog of content that's not accessible. And with that, I am done with my main part of the presentation, so I can open it up to you all.
Thank you. And I have a ton of questions and things I want to talk about, so I don't want to jump in if anyone else has anything top of mind, but I'll open it up for a second.
Well, quickly, what does WCAG stand for?
Oh goodness, let me go back because there's so many organs.
Web compliance accessibility guidelines? Question mark.
Yeah, and I'll actually add that link now because yeah, this is an organization. Let me pull this up.
Web content
Oh, content.
accessibility guidelines. Yeah, I looked it
So
up.
close.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yes, these folks, and I'm gonna throw this link in here now. But yeah, generally, like, these are good standards to, like, not just keep your organization out of legal trouble, but also just a good resource for you know, good accessibility practice across the board.
My other question was kind of trivial when you say enjoy frogs. Love that graphic of Kermit, by the way.
Oh yeah. Oh, I didn't talk about why. So the reason I picked that graphic was because I envisioned kind of a roadmap. So yeah, I'll share that one more time.
So Kermit looking at the roadmap, is that it?
Yeah, Kermit's looking at the roadmap here.
Figure it out.
And then I didn't talk about, so yes, when I think image annotations, I think about, and I think about arrows a lot. And, you know, I got to think about Katniss from the Hunger Games when I think arrows. So yeah, my apologies. I did not add the proper context there.
I read an interesting thing about alternative image text, and that is people were complaining that it shouldn't just be you know picture of Ace. You know, it should be much more descriptive of what's happening. Otherwise, it's not really much use to somebody with a reader.
Absolutely. And I did provide a link from the Microsoft style guide that, I mean, it's boldly titled "Everything You Need to Know to Write Effective Alt Text." So that'll be pretty handy to refer to, because absolutely, like, you know, my polar bear example, you know, we can bring that up again.
Yeah.
So we wrote polar bear on snow-covered ground in daytime. The polar bear has its right arm raised. You can definitely be even more descriptive than that. So I think some things to also keep in mind is to not refer to an image as an image. So just say what it is. So, like, you wouldn't want to say screenshot or picture of polar bear or something like that. You can just call it directly what it is.
Yeah.
And I like to also lead in to, you know, if I'm referring to any images, I want to also describe that, like, you know, as you will see in the following image, you know, polar bears like to say hello, but don't walk up to them because it's a trap.
You know, when I read that the alt text there, excuse me.
Oh, sure.
When you say polar bear, if I hadn't seen the picture, polar bears usually are all fours, and he's raising his right arm. Is he on threes? You know, so should have said polar bear sitting up.
Whatever, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, there's always, like, opportunities to improve the way that that you have alt text. And, you know, it's definitely, like, not perfect alt text is better than no alt text. And yeah, that could be an opportunity to, like, if you have a computer with you know, a screen reader. I know you know, I have a MacBook for work, so there's less accessibility tools for me to use specifically. So, like, I need to get access to a Windows machine so that I can download a screen reader to, like, actually experience what I'm saying. Because yeah, sometimes you don't even know until you hear it out loud. I mean, I know when I read my own stuff, yeah, I'll be like, wait, what am I trying to say? So yeah, totally agree.
And on that note too, I know there's always a lot of discussion about the value of screenshots and their purpose and why we're including them. Have you found examples in your doc set where you would, say hypothetically you're going in and adding alt text to images and it's just so low value and you're finding that out through the description that you're adding and you're like, wow, this isn't really doing a lot. Has that been helpful at all with kind of evaluating the purpose of your shots in there?
Absolutely. And that's something that like I haven't consciously thought about, but I also find myself just including less screenshots and less images in general. Especially since I work a lot of software documentation. Oftentimes if somebody has the documentation pulled up, they also have the page pulled up. So, in a lot of ways you'll be saving time and money by not including images of, say, just like a menu screen that could end up being updated years from now. It keeps your documentation up to date. It also makes it more accessible because text is just it's more accessible than, like, to me alt text is it helps. Sorry, I need a
Alt text is really exciting. It's okay.
Yeah, I realized how much I was talking because I'm like, So yeah, I think that in general, fewer images is better, and if you do have images, make sure they're accessible.
Right. I've always thought of screenshots as being sort of, if you're in a really big hurry and you want to communicate something, he doesn't have a lot of time, but man, and when you come to localization, oh my God, no. You don't want to take, if you're supporting 32 languages, you don't want to take screenshots in 32 languages. So in a way, it's a different kind of accessibility, but you see, yeah, I'm not a fan of screenshots.
Well, you want to design your screens and your screenshots in a way that the text is separable from the picture.
Absolutely. That was much better said than how I said it. Your documentation should work whether or not those screenshots you added are in there.
Exactly. Yeah.
But not just that. If you having to localize brings a lot of problems to light, and the idea that you would take a picture of text is just anathema for localization. You just don't want to take pictures of text. You want to take a picture and have text separate and combine them somehow on the fly, but not have them bound together in a way that makes it impossible to localize. And presumably that would help with screen readers as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm loving this talk about localization because I feel like a lot of those are hand in hand, like Nikki mentioned, because yeah, if you write in such a way that is more localization friendly, you're also serving, it's just more accessible to people. It's easier to translate. You're using a more simplified language. Again, it goes back to that point of just, are we talking to as many people as we can? And that's really, that's what we do.
On a kind of a side note, I've noticed the websites in general look way less terrible than they used to. And I think it's because even people who are making websites who don't know what ADA compliance is are being influenced by websites that that looks good. They don't know why. They don't know it looks good because they made it, the contrast right and everything like that. But where I still see really terrible ADA compliance or lack of it because I don't think it doesn't seem to have become a requirement there yet, is in actual physical packaging for products. You see a lot of like whatever it is, window cleaner or toilet bowl cleaner, and it got like white text on a very pale orange background and tiny letters and completely illegible. And you can just make out the word warning and then some stuff underneath it.
Warning, you can't read this.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know why that is, because it's like, where have these people been and how come, ADA compliance hasn't spread into that domain yet?
We'll have to bring back the Mr. Yuck stickers. Those,
Oh yeah, I haven't thought about those in years.
yeah,
Mr. Yuck?
yeah.
What's-
So
The little
the sticker
poison
that
face.
shows kids that something's toxic or poison.
Oh,
And I guess it was, so I actually moved to San Francisco from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania a year
Woo!
ago. So I guess Mr. Yuck was a Pittsburgh created icon. So another strange, Pittsburgh's a funny town because it's geographically not big, but it seems to have like a bigger cultural footprint than you would think.
that sounds better than when I was a kid where we learned what was poisonous by tasting it.
I'm from Pittsburgh. I moved out here to California in 1974. I grew up in the Pittsburgh area, Beaver County.
Oh yeah, you're a Yinzer.
Yeah.
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh wow. I guess I should have opened up with that first.
I've never been to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Well, and the notable thing about Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is it's spelled with an H on the end.
Oh yeah. That is that is something that I learned quickly when I misspelled it for the first time.
Yeah. Well, I lived there before they had zip codes. It was Pittsburgh. What was it? Pittsburgh 26 PA.
Oh wow.
Oh, yeah. But getting back to the, accessibility, I mean, I'm ashamed to admit this, but the companies that I worked for, apparently they had absolutely no guidelines for the style guide in terms of having alt text, because the ones I worked for were, for people who didn't have vision problems. So this is all new to me. This is like that, I would have just put that polar bear, And I'm wondering, how are they going to figure this out, So, yeah.
Well, there's also a lot of Ace has done a good job of like the visual front end, what you see in the screen. There's also a lot of under the HTML stuff, like having divs go in consecutive order and doing the architecture of the page so that it doesn't confuse readers. The e-reader, the e-reader is not the right word, but
Yeah, that wasn't an issue for any of the users of any of the companies.
When they first started having the readers, there were pages where people loved to they would make a HTML table and then put all their content in that, and then we confuse the daylights out of any kind of a reader because how do you sequence it? So that's where all that kind of proper formatting of using divs in the right structural way and everything came from, and is part of the ADA compliance.
Yeah, and to make you feel better, Nikki, I think part of it, and it's something that Bruce mentioned, websites are getting more accessible. There's a lot more mindfulness for website accessibility, and a lot of that's driven by lawsuits because yeah, so I guess to answer your to kind of don't feel bad if like you haven't thought about this. It just means your company hadn't been sued yet.
Well, I mean, the ADA was passed in what, 1972, was it? Or was it? No. It was George Bush, wasn't it? It was in the 90s or the late 80s. I forget now when it was. but it's been around a long time. And Section 508 has been around a long time. And we certainly, there's been plenty of time for people to pick it up, but it's like a lot of things, unless somebody's enforcing it, it doesn't, like Brown versus Board of Education, nobody did anything about it from 1952 to 1965, essentially.
Yeah. it
Well,
was
you know,
19
Windows has been around for a long time too, but I swear there's some company still running with DOS machines out there someplace.
Well, I have no comment about that. I remember that era very well.
There was a really well-known lost. I'm trying to think. When I worked at Williams Sonoma, I did SCADs and stuff for them, but one of them was in the wiki. I wrote an article on ADA compliance and why we should be doing it and with the basic structure of it and everything. And I included a kind of a case study of it might have been Target. It was some kind of store like Target that had a web presence, and the web presence was not at all ADA compliant. I can't remember who. I think it might have been Target. Anyway, they got sued and they lost, and they lost, and it cost them a lot of money. So it was a cautionary tale for everybody else with an e-commerce site that it's not just making it easy for your customers, it's making it easy for customers who don't read well or don't see well or have whatever kind of impairment.
It's very hard to add things on after the fact, and it's important to have these criteria part of your early thinking in the design.
Yeah, you're lucky that one of the company colors wasn't like yellow,
Yeah.
That would be horrible.
Well, marketing, I've had good relationships with marketing people and marketing writers and marketing designers at the various places I've worked, but sometimes it is a little bit tricky and diplomatically challenging because they have different criteria and they just want to do stuff and it's I worked for an online real estate company that just had a marketing department that was too big. They were bigger than the amount of work that they had to do, and so, but they were not lazy people, so they were looking for stuff to do, and they kept handing me content that had no role at all in what we were doing. And that's where things like the pale orange with pale cyan or something, weird color combinations, because they're not thinking about communication in terms of text, but in terms of images and color, and that's not always compatible with actually letting people know what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they didn't include accessibility as one of their early criteria, and it's just impossible after the fact to make it work. Once you've gone way down the road with a set of criteria, it's very hard to add something new.
Well, with the orange, for example, as an example, maybe you can go back to the marketing people and say, what if we took that orange, you kept the chroma the same, but just brought the value way down so it was a darker version of that same color, and it would work better as a color of text on white background or a background for white text.
Yeah, and so what Richard's talking about, like going back and trying to improve the accessibility of existing content, I think that's probably the most difficult part of what my next steps are with Crunchyroll. Yeah, it's very easy for me to implement new guidelines that do serve accessibility, ADA compliance, 508 compliance, but that we still have a lot of just non-compliant, inaccessible images and text. So that's something that I'll be kind of researching on, and I know it's going to be expensive, but yeah, it's something, and a company has to know that like do you want to deal with lawsuits, or would you rather spend money on
Mhm.
this instead of lawyer fees?
Mhm.
Yeah. I
They
think
can at least hope that if their new stuff is compatible with the guidelines, then the old stuff may survive and not be sued out of existence until its natural death. You know?
Yeah,
Call it legacy content.
legacy content, yeah.
Warning, legacy content. This might not be accessible.
Yeah, I was attending a webinar on accessibility recently, and I think the stat that the organization put up was it's about 30 to 40% more costly to retrofit than it is to implement universal design from the start. And it was pretty eye-opening when you think about the cost of what we do and how that just increases exponentially the less you think about up front and the more you have to retro.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's only 30 to 40% more expensive.
Yeah, I think they were being generous. It was an if you hire us, it's only this much more, but I think in the wild, yeah, it would be astronomically more.
Well, it depends a lot. If you have really well-structured HTML, and the only thing that is wrong is the colors are wrong, and there aren't, the blanking on the term, but the labels on the images and stuff. If that's the only issue, then you're okay. But if it's like just really messy HTML, and which I've seen a lot of, unfortunately, and it can be basically you have to start over. So paste all the content into the new code.
That's why some of these frameworks are so important that people can use, because they've designed these frameworks to make structuring the HTML much more rigorous.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think WordPress, I think, is just sort of compliant out the gate if you don't mess with the template too much.
Yeah. Of course, if you actually have to do anything in WordPress, that's another matter.
Yeah, it's its own set of headaches.
Yeah.
And so, Ace, I know you're very much in those beginning stages as you're getting momentum with your stakeholders. I was just curious, like, how did this start for you? How did you, like, when you joined Crunchyroll, how did this become an initiative that you took on, and what was the initial reception, just out of curiosity? Because I know I've had some unpleasant conversations with stakeholders that haven't gone well. Always interested in maybe strategies that work better or anything of
Yeah.
that nature.
No, that's a good question, because like I guess that's one of the reasons why I joined the company. And I guess I didn't mention, so oh gosh, I'm probably on month 8 at Crunchyroll. During interviews, I brought that up as something I talked about accessibility and why it was important to me. And I had good conversations with the hiring manager, some of the developers that I had talked to. There was this value on like making things accessible, making sure that we are serving our customers and our colleagues in a way that makes them feel included. So that was something that I had put, that was one of my values that I wanted to make sure was heard before I even took an offer at the company. And it's the first company that I joined that does have an employee resource group dedicated toward disability inclusion. And that's something that I even talked about, like, what opportunities are there to improve culture at the company. So yeah, I had good conversations going in. Would I have taken this job if I got the sense that they didn't care? Probably not, because I'm personally frustrated whenever, when I work on documentation and software, if I'm if I have to document a feature and I see that it is just completely inaccessible and there's nothing I can do about it, I have to like write documentation around it. And it feels bad knowing that we're serving a product to people that is just bad. Maybe it does, you know, I worked at a fintech company before, like maybe this does help people move money from point A to point B efficiently, but I mean, if you have to use a screen reader, you're not going to be able to use that feature. And, you know, in the past, you know, I've run into roadblocks where it's just, this isn't your lane, like write your documentation. So like in the past, I had written documentation as sort of a band-aid for bad design in like web applications. So at least I feel like I'm in a spot in my current company that I can help influence, not just from the technical writing perspective, but also to the rest of the company. Hopefully we get closed captions in the future at Crunchyroll. But something really interesting that I could talk about is that you know, as part of a hackathon this year, and that's something that, you know, as a company, we get together in different teams and just try to come up with an idea that should be, that we think would be a great feature for the platform. And one idea that I signed up for was American Sign Language support in the video player. And that was something that even that like my team won. And I saw that like the product leaders liked this idea that like, oh, we want to have an option for people to see somebody signing in a video, so that you know, people who speak ASL can also feel like, hey, we're serving you as a customer, because ASL is not a direct translation to English written language. And a lot of people assume it is. So, you know, it's like not being able to enjoy content in your native language or whatever your primary language is. So seeing that from a company culture perspective, like it definitely makes me feel like I made the right call when I joined this company. And so, yeah, I do feel like I'm empowered to actually make a difference because, you know, they're listening. And, you know, I can help prevent them from getting into lawsuits, hopefully.
How big is Crunchyroll?
Oh, gosh. So from a personnel standpoint, there's about 1,200 people, but the company was bought by Sony about a year ago. So I think there's a lot more resources now that they can allocate towards like the employee resource groups that I mentioned earlier, because those groups they're a year old now. So like I joined at a time that it seems like the company is actually investing in that sort of culture improvement.
Well,
So
you've brought up several times the issue of lawsuits, and when you make a proposal for this, having a few case histories of lawsuits, really good selling point. And another selling point is that if you make an ADA compliant website and just by some fluke of the universe, you never get a single customer or user who needs any of that, you still have a better website because it's more maintainable, it's cleaner, it's easier for everybody to read because you know, I can read again white letters on a pale orange background, but I don't like to.
right, absolutely, yeah. It's I think that the more accessible, we'll say, a piece of documentation is, the better. I mean, it just generally is just better. I mean, that's not a very eloquent way of saying it, but yeah, it's just better. Yeah, you can have, I know there's a lot of, you know, we talk a lot about like how marketing does end up making some decisions that are questionable for, you know, you talk about your yellow on white background on your labels. That was something that was on my mind when I wrote that a newsletter article about color contrast, because I was absolutely calling out the marketing team for for saying you should put orange text on a white background. And again, it's just they're not basing that on science or it's aesthetics, and yeah, it's branding. You should have certain color for branding, but we're not trying to sell, especially if you're giving presentations internally. We're not selling each other anything, so just make it easier to read for everybody.
Also in your proposal, you can use the various tools that rate the site on contrast and different features. Print out the results and include that in the proposal. This is
Absolutely.
how terrible we are now.
No, I'm loving this. I'm taking notes.
Oh, perhaps I should mention that for 18 and a half years in my career, I worked for a company that did chemical drawing software. And the documentation that I wrote was hundreds of chemical drawing, chemical structure drawings, like, you know what that is. Yeah, like a benzene or whatever. And yeah, and I'm thinking, yeah, of course not. Yeah, I mean, all the people, when you have a drawing program, especially chemists, that's how they communicate. So I don't feel so bad about not putting alt text on those things. On every single one of those images. Oof.
And those applications are getting smarter too. Lucidchart's doing a lot with built-in accessibility too. So often you'll get images that are in themselves not flat, and you can use them in better ways. So it's been exciting to see that in the more recent iterations of apps I've been using.
I imagine it would be it would be really useful to have detailed alt text on a chemical drawing, don't you think?
Actually, if I thought of it, there is a standard way of naming chemicals that's called it's like a mile long, but I could have put the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemists have a standard for, let's see, there's 4-butyl, 1,3-diphenyl, 4,5,3,5-pyrazolidine dione. Like that's an example of it that actually completely describes the structure. But that isn't suitable for, because chemists use all kinds of different names for the same chemical structure, you see. So in theory, I could have put the IUPAC name, as alt text. If I ever work in that industry again, I'll think about that. And there might be several different IUPAC compatible names for a given chemical structure, you see. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, Ace, thank you very much. I really have appreciated this talk, and I hope we all have appreciated it. I'm going to before we end the recording, I'm going to show you what we present to our speakers. This is we modeled this after the coveted press club mug. Yeah, and so we will find a way to get this to you. It's been a little difficult since we've been doing Zoom meetings, but we're going to, now that Jasmine is in the area, we're going to endow her with a set of these, and then it's going to be her responsibility from now on. But
one might go missing though.
I really wanted to thank you, and I hope you enjoy the mug. And
absolutely, yeah. Thank you all so much for inviting me. This is it's nice to be able to just talk about something that I care a lot about, and I'm glad that you all were interested in it. So yeah, I appreciate everybody's time.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording now, and then People can keep talking all they want, but I'm going to stop the recording.